Hello and welcome to Bloke on the Range. I'm here with Karl of In Range and we've got a particularly nerdy shooting topic for you today. Sights, how to set them. And we're talking open sights or post front sight, at least, irrespective of whether
You mean a red dot? It is 2019.
I mean, you can paint a little red dot on...
Oh, you're talking about that metal stuff that they used to use back on the old things?
Yeah, before they had batteries. Then...
Oh, all right. So
Yeah.
we're talking about iron sights.
Yes,
Okay.
iron sights with a post front sight and either an aperture or a U-notch rear. Now, there's a lot of debate on how these should be set.
Barley corn German sights.
Do they exist? I'm not even sure I can see them.
Just don't use them. Let's move on. Okay.
Yeah. So there's often a lot of debate as to where the bullet shot should hit, and this applies to both pistol and rifle, with respect to the tip of the front sight. Your colleague Ian
Yes.
disagrees with both of us.
Yes, in fact, so there's a lot of times where he's traveling or whatever, and we're going to do a match coming up, and we have a gun that he's going to use in the match, and I happen to have it, and I'm kind of the in-range armorer, for lack of a better term, so I'll zero it for Ian. And he always goes, center of mass, not that 6 o'clock crap. He wants center of mass hold on his rifle. So that means that when you're aiming at the target, you want the front sight, or front post, is essentially in the middle of the target, and it hits exactly where it is imposed over the target.
The closest I ever get to this is an inch over, irrespective of the range, or if in terms of rifle distances. I want it at least 1 minute of angle higher. With a pistol at 25 meters, I want to be aiming at the bottom of the 10 ring on an ISSF target and have my shots go an inch higher. That is my ideal, unless I'm shooting at a black dot, when I want to put it really 6 o'clock. In fact, an inch under the bottom. I want my reference point to be visible. I don't want to cut my reference point in half. I'll cut. See, how can we do this with a fist? Let's say I want to shoot at the middle. I don't want to bisect that.
Nope.
I want it at the very least just below, and if we're talking target shooting,
A line of light or white below it.
below it. Yeah, and we both got originally a target shooting background.
We do. I shot NRA high power across the course for a long time. Did essentially that's a lot of people in the Marines will be familiar with it because it's also the Marine Corps course of fire on the known distance range. So it is typically 200, 300, and in the Marines 500, or in NRA circles 200, 300, and 600 with an AR-15. And you're shooting at a relatively small black circle at all of those, standing, kneeling, sitting, prone, and then prone slow fire. Because it is a circle, you have a known reference point of aim. But in that environment, I learned very much that the most precise aiming zero possible is a 6 o'clock hold.
Absolutely. My original background was with target rifles with a ring front sight, so this wasn't a question, you just line the rings up. And when I got into historic rifle shooting, I started using post sights, and then certainly with certain types of sights, you've got a reasonable flexibility of how you zero it. Some you don't. Some rifles, there were only one light front sight, and they just had a surprisingly large tolerance of what they considered to be an adequate zero, but that's a topic for another day. And this became a bit more poignant to me when I started shooting K31 rifles in Switzerland, because they are officially sighted point of aim, point of impact at 100 and 200 meters, and then from 300 back, it's 1 promille high, so about 4 minutes of angle. So it's a thousandth of the distance along. It shoots high, and this was really a sop to the target shooting community, who mostly, if they wanted to shoot a full 6 o'clock hold under the black on the target, they just set their sights to 400 anyway, because the difference that made at 300 was 30 centimeters, exactly 1 promille. But then they did it further back, and there is a logic to this, because the size of a torso or a human at 300, it's quite small. It's not a big thing to be aiming at, and certainly at 500, when you're putting that big chunky post, and by the way, the front post on a K31 is about optimal. It's a bit thicker than on a Lee Enfield, but it's not massively huge. But you're covering a lot of it at 500. You can't see it well anyway. It's probably moving around because it doesn't want to be hit.
Probably.
And there's a certain logic to remember to hold a bit down. And in fact, how far were the rifles used in aimed fire anyway?
It is very arguable that, except with rare exception, the realistic practical engagement of a human target in the field is 300 meters, and that's exceptionally far because they don't want to be seen. It is realistically 200, 100 or less. Statistics show 50.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's another discussion.
Yeah. As an example, because people are probably thinking of exceptions, apparently, I remember hearing somewhere that one of the first shots fired in the First World War knocked a German officer off a horse at 400. But that's an exceptional
Very rare, man.
shot. And then in the West, there were these odd shots at thousands of yards.
There's
but-
always exceptions. But if you look at the data from like the Eastern Front, which I tend to emphasize in terms of, if you're going to learn about military history, it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with where were the most cataclysmic battles ever fought by humankind happen to be there. And if you look at the data, there's reports from the German side consistently saying over and over again, engagement 40 meters, 30 meters, 45 meters. We need something that doesn't shoot so far with less recoil, which became, of course, a Kurtz STG-44 and the intermediate cartridge. Well, they existed before that, but the really practical application.
Yeah, actually getting them into a field in numbers. Back at the plot, if you've got your sight set for an absolutely point of aim, point of impact hold at the maximum range that you're thinking of shooting, and I'm coming at this from a competition perspective where we're shooting 25 meters, 50 meters, and 50 meters even with the pistol. If you're only shooting defensive style shooting up to 21 feet or something, it's an entirely different ballpark. We're talking entirely different constraints. But you can get minor changes in your hold that will affect your point of impact. And if you're set bang on and just for whatever reason you're feeling a bit off or your grip's a bit off and your point of impact drops below your point of aim, you've got to cover the target with your front sight. And you'd be amazed, non-pistol shooters or people who've never shot at significant distance possibly be amazed at how much the point of impact can change with respect to the sights just due to a slight error in hold.
It takes nothing.
Yeah, and revolvers, because there's no beaver tail to push your hand up against, you can have a massive difference in point of impact. And what you really don't want to have to do is to aim over. And to go back into historic shooting, the simplest version of the rear sight on the number 4 rifle was a 2-position flip. The lower one was 300 yards with the bayonet fixed, 400 without the bayonet, and 600 without the bayonet when flipped up. And the manual has a series of holds, and they're either holds bang on or holds under. You were never supposed to hold over, because how do you aim at something you can't see because you're covering it with your front sight? Yep. And that's the major issue. And then, so, I mean, here we've given the two situations where we want, like, our version of point of aim, point of impact, for me, minimum that over at the longest range I would like to require to fire at. And if we're shooting at a very precise diagram, I want it to go so that I can aim that much underneath the reference
a
of the
slight line
diagram.
of white. And that's target shooting.
That's target shooting.
However, I will say this, that even when it comes to practical / combat shooting, I still prefer a 6 o'clock hold with iron sights. And typically you'll see this, actually some of this is done right in some of the older historic guns in which the aiming point was belt buckle hold. And that's because you have from here to here, which with the trajectory of these types of projectiles, they're not very flat shooting, gives you a pretty good regional marginal error out to the distances in which you'll be able to visually see the target anyway. So when it comes to iron sights, I still zero 6 o'clock hold, even with modern guns. So when I'm shooting a plate, let's say a match, I still hold the 6 o'clock of the target with irons if I'm shooting irons. And this is the debate I get into with Ian, because he's always like, give me center mass. But with my pistols and my rifles with iron sights, now red dot, no, you want the dot to be exactly where it hits. That's different. Or glass, you want it to be exactly where it hits. With irons, even for combat / practical tactical shooting, I still want a 6 o'clock hold.
Yeah, and I had something like that. I got the opportunity to zero the Australian SLR. Thank you very much, Eric, from Costa Rica, who loaned me the SLR to shoot to finish brutality. Yeah. The longest gun in the match, the only gun in 308 in the match, and the only person mad enough to shoot it in the match. We had different ammo to what it had been previously zeroed for. I had to make 2 full turns of the front sight, but even so, we didn't have the opportunity to zero on paper, so zeroing on steel. But I ended up with a hole that was like a third of the way up the plate.
Yeah.
I was totally cool with that.
Yeah.
Even though normally I'd have been middle of the plate plus an inch at 70 meters.
This is one of the things we do at two-gun matches and brutality matches, which is we have a no-paint policy.
Yeah.
The targets are actually very visually difficult to see. And when you're trying to focus, when you aim with the iron sights, your focus is the front sight, not the target, not the rear aperture, not the rear sighting apparatus, it's the front sight. That's what should be clear. That means that you have to know that it's clear but superimposed upon the target you're trying to hit. If the target you're trying to hit is very visually hard to identify, having a lower or 6 o'clock or lower 1/3 hold makes it more viable for me, sounds like for you as well,
absolutely.
to be able to know that my front sight that is now clear in my sight picture is actually superimposed on the target I'm trying to strike.
Yep. And not somewhere else. Know your target, know where you are on the target, don't cut off too much of the target. And U-notch sights are particularly bad for that because they literally cut off half the world.
They are, but if you go 6 o'clock hold, that makes them again more viable.
Much more viable. You want to see what you're shooting at and not cover half of what you want to shoot at with your front sight. So, if you've been struggling with covering part of the target with your front sight, consider trying setting it just that little bit higher and holding just that little bit lower, and hopefully that will help you in your shooting endeavors.
I'll close for this. For example, when I'm shooting, I made fun of the barleycorn sights on the Kar 98, but like frequently, when I'm shooting historic guns at a two-gun match, my sight zero is actually set to 300. Even though I'm shooting very close, because it allows me to have good sight pictures at close range.
And a lot of historic rifles had a lowest sight setting of 300 or 400 even, which 400 meters is...
That gets to be too much.
That gets to be too much.
Then you're now aiming at feet, and it becomes hard.
Very excessive, but just having it that little bit higher than you're shooting at sometimes, it was... Oh, in fact, if you saw my video on the Merton Sheeson this year, 2019, I had a little discourse at the start as to how I'd set my sights, because we were shooting at about 200 meters at these very difficult to see paper targets with no spotting or anything, and I wanted to be able to see the aiming mark over the top of my front sight and not have to push the front sight into the aiming mark.
Excellent.
So there you go.
Interesting that both of us come from target backgrounds. You just did exceptionally well at Finished Brutality. We'll see more of that on all the channels. And we both have the exact same perspective on how iron sights should be zero.
Yeah.
And this isn't to make fun if you do different. This is just what we, because we're agreeing on this one, believe it is the best way to make sure you're getting the hits that you're looking to get.
Yep. So from that sample size of 2, thank you very much for watching. Please, if you don't know who Karl is, go and watch In Range.
Thank you.
Please consider supporting him on Patreon. We are out here in Finland with the support of patrons, so thank you very much to them. And please consider supporting Bloke on the Range on Patreon if you haven't already done so. And see you again sometime. Now, should we go and feed the black mackerblans?
Yeah, we found them. They won't come back into society. So it turns out we just have to bring them food occasionally. Beer.
Do we leave a trail of very dark, very strong beers?
We could try that. That might be an interesting thing, but then we have to have some sort of live trap because we don't want to hurt them.
No,
Yeah.
they're very sensitive.
It is a cultural resource.
Yeah, should be preserved.